Okay, little disclaimer, this is a heavy one. I'm a big proponent of bringing the personal into politics and the work we do. And these types of videos are always quite hard to make for me. I felt emotional many times. I felt a mix of anger, shame, sadness, but also strength and resilience. I'm hoping this video will help move the conversation forward. I believe it can, and I strongly encourage you to share it around you, especially to people for whom the algorithm that brought you here might not recommend that sort of content. The story starts in 2020 in a supermarket.
Il est en train de filmer sous votre robe le téléphone comme ça à l'instant. Vous portez plainte?
This is Dominique Pélicot, the husband of Gisèle Pélicot. This video was filmed 4 years ago. In it, a guard caught Pélicot filming under the skirts of several women in a supermarket. He immediately called the police and asked the victim to file a complaint.
Je prends vos coordonnées, je vous rappelle dès que la police arrive pour le dépôt de plainte. Parce que là, il faut aller jusqu'au bout. Des comportements comme ça, c'est...
None of what I'm about to share with you would have happened if the female guard watching the cameras didn't notice Dominique Pélicot taking pictures, or if the victim didn't file a complaint after the guard recommended her to do so. So Dominique Pélicot's phone was confiscated by the police as well as his laptop. On it, the police found 20,000 photos and videos documenting the abuse of his wife, Gisèle Pélicot. Between 2011 and 2020, Gisèle, now 72 years old, was drugged without her knowledge by her husband. While she was unconscious, he handed her over to dozens of men who raped her. The police identified 50 men, but there seemed to be many more. The trial took place in Avignon, and on December 20, 2024, Dominique Pélicot was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The 50 other men were also convicted, with sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years. Some of them, coming from all sorts of professional backgrounds, claimed they didn't know Gisèle hadn't consented, but the evidence was overwhelming and their excuses didn't hold up. What makes this case stand out even more is Gisèle's incredible bravery. She refused to let the trial be held behind closed doors. Instead, she wanted the world to hear her story, to expose the reality of rape culture and misogynistic violence. She spoke out, saying she wanted to shift the blame away from victims and onto the perpetrators, hoping her voice would encourage other survivors to come forward. Her story resonated widely, drawing massive media attention and sparking discussions about consent and sexual violence laws in France. Politicians and public figures around the world praised her courage. El País wrote an editorial addressing the situation. The Guardian did the same thing, showing support for Gisèle Pélicot. Financial Times recognized Gisèle Pélicot as one of the 25 most influential women of 2024, and Gisèle Pélicot was also on the cover of Germany Vogue. The international interest for the case is revealing of two things. First, it's unsure if the French Me Too ever happened. There have been some significant cases of celebrities being accused, but the backlash has always been very, very strong. So it's hard to measure if Me Too really had an impact in French society. In fact, 1 week after the Pélicot trial was concluded, politician Gérald Darmanin, accused of rape, was promoted as Justice Secretary. I'll give you a few seconds to process that. This is not a joke. A person accused of rape by one woman and abuse of a vulnerable situation by another woman was nominated as Justice Secretary. The second reason why the international press is interested in this case is because of the paradoxes of France when it comes to women's rights. On the one hand, France appears as a progressive country worldwide. It strengthened that reputation when it put the freedom to have an abortion in the constitution. Yet international commentators also know that France has a specific view on rape. It doesn't like to talk about it or acknowledge it. You see, France is supposed to be the country of love, passionate love. French men are known for being natural seducers. But the country isn't immune to rape, and 94% of rape accusations don't lead to condemnation. 94%, that's a lot of liars. Also, in late 2023, France said it was firmly opposed to the idea of a European standard definition for rape, because that definition included the notion of consent. I was there when MEPs Frances Fitzgerald and Evin Ince were tirelessly working on getting France and other countries to get on board, and France, the country of human rights, didn't. So yeah, my country likes to pride itself for embracing romance, for promoting sexual liberation. We grew up hearing that the British, the Americans are all Puritans, and we, the French, are progressive. French political and cultural commentators were very happy to talk about the Weinstein case, etc. But when Me Too arrived in France, they suddenly became quite reactionary. Because in France, we're more flexible. We are the masters of the art of seduction. Our men are seducers, not rapists. So that's the context of the trial, that's the context in France, and I think the reasons why the international press gave so much importance to this case. So now let's go back to the trial and let's talk about the defendants. 51 men were identified and many more appeared on the pictures and videos. It's unclear how they got in touch with Dominique Pélicot. Some talked about an online chat website, coco.fr. They reached out to Pélicot or Pélicot reached out to them. Almost all of them live less than 50 kilometers, so 31 miles away from the house of the Pélicot. That's the first element that really struck the public. 50 plus men living in a 31 miles radius came to the Pélicot's house, knowing in more or less details what was going to happen. The second element that really disturbed the public and caused a lot of discomfort were the profiles of those men. The monsters were pretty average guys. Let me give you some examples. Dominique D, 45 years old, truck driver, 6 visits between 2015 and 2020. Then Jacques C, 33 years old, former firefighter, retired truck driver, 1 visit during the night of February 24 to 25th. Then Simone M, 43 years old, alpine hunter for 12 years, then driver in a public works company, 1 visit. Philippe L, 62 years old, gardener, 1 visit on June 7th, 2018. Then Redouane EF, 55 years old, nurse, and 1 visit in 2019. Then Jean-Pierre Maréchal, 63 years old, a truck driver in an agricultural cooperative. He didn't do anything to Gisèle, but he's accused of having raped his own wife at least 12 times while she was under chemical submission, following the protocol provided by Dominique Pélicot. A lot of these men are in a relationship or married. A lot of them have children or grandchildren. Now, one of the toughest parts of the trial for Gisèle Pélicot was to hear the defense of those people. Some admitted their crimes early on. Dominique Pélicot pleaded guilty from the start and was followed by other defendants. Some, however, worked with their lawyers to prove that they did not intend to rape Gisèle. That was the crux of the issue, legally speaking, proving that there was no intent to rape. So someone said they had had the consent of the husband. Others explained that they were the victims of Dominique Pélicot. Someone said that if they wanted to rape someone, they wouldn't have chosen a 57-year-old woman. Someone else explained that he was looking for what he couldn't get at home. Another person said that he did it for the Pélicot couple, not for himself. And then another said that if he knew it was going to be a rape, he would have asked Pélicot not to take any pictures or videos. So during the trial, some lawyers used interesting strategies to defend their clients. Feminist activist and journalist Victoire Tuaillon called them the lawyers of patriarchy. For example, one lawyer made a comparison between his client's sexual urges and the roar of the deer. Such comparisons are reminiscent of the discourse of the manosphere. I guess you're familiar with it by now. It's the idea that men must be civilized animals, meaning that they must tame their violent pulsions but never fully cancel them.
Part of the reason that women like men who have some capacity for aggression, but who are still productive and reciprocal, is that men who are productive and reciprocal, who have some capacity for aggression, can keep the real monsters at bay. So it's hard on women, because they have to navigate that really thin line between productive generosity and the capacity for aggression. That's a really tough thing to navigate.
They say that society's viability depends on men's ability to use violence only when necessary to protect women, children, and the nation. French reactionary commentator Éric Zemmour said that men must be civilized predators.
Il faut qu'il soit un prédateur sexuel civilisé.
Victoire Tuaillon said she felt bad for some of the defendants because the arguments put forward by their lawyers were ridiculously bad. Many also tried to put the blame on Gisèle Pélicot, asking her questions about her sexuality and fantasies. But other lawyers chose the more meaningful approach. They chose to defend their clients by putting forward their traumatic past. They asked the audience to put aside the atrocities for a second and try to understand how they got there and what we can learn from it as a society. So let's do that. What is the psychology of the defendants? Well, psychological expertise said that many defendants showed signs of self-centeredness, a lack of empathy, and limited introspective skills. Interestingly, studies on the education of boys have shown that these characteristics, or lack of characteristic, are quite common. That doesn't mean that men are born with zero empathy, but rather that there's an entire culture that tells them that empathy will limit their potential, their career, their sex life, their social status. There was another striking feature about the defendants. A lot of them did not understand consent. And a lot of them seemed to have just learned that what they did was a rape. Technically, that information cannot be used for defense purposes. One of the first things I learned when I studied law was nemo jus ignorare censetur, which means ignorance of law excuses no one. But I think we should still take that as a sign because it means that more prevention and more education are needed. Now, because of those features, Gisèle's lawyers and many commentators invoked the notion of rape culture. That notion is quite controversial, especially in France, where it's seen as yet another American export like wokeism and gender studies, etc. However, the Gisèle Pélicot trial strikingly validates that concept. Let me explain why. Well, first of all, saying that rape culture is a thing doesn't mean that every man is a potential rapist. Rather, it says that there is a culture that nurtures sexism in the form of jokes, in the way women are depicted on TV, on social media, in films, in the form of sexual harassment, in public transports and offices, in the way gender roles are sustained in the home, etc., etc. This is the environment in which men and women grow up and learn to interact with each other. That means that even if most men wouldn't do what Pélicot and the defendants did, many of them still feel uncomfortable when we talk about this trial. Many of them are more likely to be skeptical of what Gisèle Pélicot says. Many of them will protect their male friends who have had problematic behaviors with women because that's fine. They can do that. In fact, they risk more by calling out the BS, speaking against the culture, and standing with female victims. They might not be perpetrators, but they facilitate the job of perpetrators. In the case of the Pélicot trial, none of the defendants and none of the people who read or heard of Dominique Pélicot's little game online or in real life, none of them reported it to the police. This is what we call a systemic issue. This is why the phrase rape culture exists. Also, professionals who work with perpetrators of sexual violence often notice patterns of childhood violence, psychological violence, domestic violence when they examine the past of those people. During the Pélicot trial, a fourth of the defendants shared that they had undergone or seen such violence growing up. They needed help. They didn't get the help, and now they reproduce that violence onto other people. Male perpetrators generally turn to those they have power over, women. We live in a culture that still objectifies women, where men, even the least privileged, know that they still have power over women. I want to make it clear that scientifically speaking, there is no causal relationship in the transition from victim to perpetrator. Instead, having been a victim is shown to be one risk factor in that transition. Other elements like economic distress, drunkenness, addictions, which can be related back to economic distress, can also be added to the list of risk factors. Now, it's interesting to see that women also suffer from abuse in their childhood, as well as economic distress or addictions, yet they don't generally turn into perpetrators. That means there's something else we need to tackle here, and some call it, yes, you see me coming, rape culture. So to sum it up, the combination of 1, rape culture, plus 2, risk factors like A, past experiences of violence, or B, economic distress, or C, other things, give us the rapists of Gisèle Pélicot. In that equation, number 2A is the product of number 1 and 2B and C. Now that we have this equation in mind, we can wonder if jail time is the best solution to solve the problem of sexual violence. If such violence is the result of a culture, of past experiences of violence and various other social factors, shouldn't we focus on those elements first? Well, this is an ongoing debate in feminist circles. Some feminists campaign for tougher punishments and better trials to deter sexual violence. Other feminists prefer to look at alternatives outside the prison system. We call that restorative justice. And to be honest with you, many feminists find themselves between the two camps. Le cul entre deux chaises, as we say in French. Now, something really interesting happened during the trial. In France, you can't film in the courtroom. You can only draw, and I think you need permission to do that. The only real images we saw on TV showed what happened outside the courtroom. So when I turned on the TV, I was struck to see the very long lines of mostly women showing support to Gisèle and hoping to have a seat in the courtroom. Every single day, women would queue for hours hoping to see the trial. Some commented that it was a form of toxic voyeurism, but journalist Victoire Tuaillon saw it differently. She called it a collective catharsis. Basically, she can't help but look at these women and think that they're coming to experience the trial they never got. We said it earlier, 94% of accusations do not end up with a condemnation, and you can't even imagine the amount of women who don't even go for that trial. So she thinks that these women are coming to get some closure. In that case, closure means two things. First, a recognition of the status of victim, and second, punishment. Now, that punishment can take two forms. Restorative justice is number one, and the second one is the prison. Some victims find closure in knowing that the person has changed and won't do that again. Other victims find closure in knowing that the person will spend some time in jail. Obviously, this depends on the circumstances of the crimes and the psychology of the victim. Personally, I find closure in knowing that the person is working on changing and won't do that to someone else. Now, with all that said, I also recognize that it is quite comfortable for me to promote restorative justice because, I haven't felt very safe lately, I'm not gonna lie to you, but at least I feel like I have some control in a way. Victims of domestic violence are a much more interesting case though, because they live with the paradox of not wanting someone they often care about to go to prison, yet know that their livelihood is under threat. Also, many victims of SA describe the assault as a sort of lifelong sentence, and so they want the person, the criminal, to suffer just as much in prison. It's a tough one, honestly, and I don't feel comfortable telling another woman what closure should mean for her. Yet, I also want to encourage a collective move towards a new understanding of justice, one that is not centered on the perpetrator and prison. The prison isn't the only way of tackling this problem. In other words, we won't put an end to sexual violence by threatening perpetrators with heavy jail time. We can also solve the problem by looking at the social risk factors, economic distress, rape culture, and work on changing that as well. So I haven't talked about Gisèle that much in this video. I did it for a reason. Gisèle wanted to be a medium for a bigger cause. She was moved by the support, but always said that this was bigger than her. In fact, her trial has often been compared to another famous trial in France. In 1978, Anne Tonglé and Araceli Castellano were raped by a group of men while camping. Gisèle Halimi, another Gisèle, and a well-known human rights lawyer pushed for the trial to be held in public. Just like Gisèle Pélicot, she believed that this openness was crucial to shifting the blame from the victims to the perpetrators. In May 1978, during the trial in Aix-en-Provence, Anne Tonglé and Araceli Castellano bravely shared their stories in open court, even though they faced accusations suggesting their lifestyle had somehow invited the attack. The implication was that there are bad and good victims. Anne Tonglé, Araceli Castellano, and their lawyer were systematically welcomed by lines of men spitting at them, insulting them. They were bad victims, fallen women. Gisèle Pélicot, on the other hand, clearly is a good victim. She's brave, she's elegant, she remained composed throughout the trial, she stayed strong. The people queuing outside the court were women who came to support her, not men who came to spit at her. Gisèle Pélicot is also a mother, she was a wife, she deserved the status of the perfect victim. She can safely be put on the cover of magazines. But imagine if we learned something bad about Gisèle. Something about her that would challenge her perceived greatness. Would she still be our hero? We've seen times and times again how the reputation of a woman can easily be destroyed, how their victimhood can be taken away from them in an instant. So that's why I'm convinced that the belief in a cause should not rest on the perceived greatness of its advocates. Interestingly, right after the Pélicot trial ended, French actress Adèle Haenel was also in a trial against director Christophe Ruggia. A few years ago, she had left the Oscar ceremony after renowned child predator Roman Polanski received an award and applause for his film. So during her trial, Adèle Haenel screamed, "Shut your mouth," to Ruggia. That was not elegant. That was loud and arrogant. And unsurprisingly, Adèle Haenel will not appear on the cover of magazines. She's not the perfect victim, yet she remains a victim and an advocate of a worthy cause, like Gisèle Pélicot. I don't know if there's a moral to this story, a way to conclude this properly. It's a shame that we need those trials to move the conversation forward and work on better legislation as well. That's all I had to say for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, the conversation continues in the comments section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe if it's not already done. I would like to thank my patrons for their support, and a special thank to top tier patrons James Desupong, Wolf Gratz, Patrick Button, Devish Mohan Mina, Jeff Lee, Yilan, Tayab Matin, Nick, Brandon, Jem Siddle, Ojwal, Pablo, Patrick, Boris, Ria, Koriji, Tristan, Jan, Donage, Alex, Manuel, Christopher, and Perry. And thank you to the other ones who prefer to stay anonymous. That's it. That was the first video of the year. Not the funniest video, but again, I think this conversation is important. Again, I'd be extremely grateful if you could share this video around you to people who might have heard of the trial but don't really understand the implication of it, or people who haven't heard of it at all. I'd be super grateful if you could do that. And yeah, I'll see you very soon. Salut!